was looking at the wrong part. We don't open this podcast differently. I was like about to read the question. I'm like, no, that's the wrong stanza in my notes.
Joe.
Not to be confused with George Costanza. Well, thanks for tuning in for today's episode of Mixed Messages with Jeff
I feel like
Bogue.
you're losing your edge.
You think so?
Yeah, I do.
Well, I'm glad.
You should probably rest.
I probably should.
Are you hungry?
This is today's last episode. Oh,
are you cold?
Actually, I don't think I'm as affected by those things as other people are.
Oh.
I'm sure I'm affected by them, but not nearly to the... First of all, I'm kind of like the Hulk. I'm always hungry. And, I'm Joe Caruso, your host. I'm always hungry, and I'm excited to dive into our topic for the day. In a world where everyone, from news outlets to comedians, friends to advertisements, they seem to have a strong opinion of how we should think, live, and make decisions, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all the noise. And when everyone's offering different advice, how do we cut through the confusion? How do we sift through the information overload and determine what truly governs our lives? Well, as we navigate these challenging questions, we want to offer a resource that helps you navigate and process some of the most pressing issues of today. Let's go ahead and jump in.
Oh, we're jumping in now.
Oh, we are jumping in.
Because you kind of jumped in, then you jumped out.
I did jump in and jump out, and it's partly because I was looking at the wrong part of my notes.
Did you do the hokey pokey and turn yourself around?
I wasn't even thinking that. I can real quick for our video. No, I'm not going to do that. Even our producer Jason saying, "No, please, no, God, no." He's praying over there fervently. That's good. Well, Jeff, we do have a question that has come in from our listener. That makes it sound like we have one listener. Bob Ball sent this in. How much church involvement would you consider healthy? I remember on a Mixed Messages podcast, Pastor Jeff mentioned when he was younger, his church emphasized a lot of church involvement. If I remember correctly, I didn't think he spoke of a lot of church involvement as necessarily positive. I think it's probably a personal decision how involved to be in church, but if the church constantly encourages more and more involvement, it is hard to maintain a lesser involvement and not experience judgment from church members. I've also seen too much involvement has led to sacrificing family time. It's very important. Jeff, how do we navigate what feels like a tension between get involved but not for involvement's sake, and there can be over-involvement, and how many more times can I say the word involvement before you speak?
I don't know. How many?
How involved do you want to be in this conversation?
I think it all depends on what you mean by involvement.
Thank you. And that wraps up today's episode. No, it's good. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think the way that the question's written, which is fine, but the way it's written is the question is being asked, if the church is a social institution, how much should I volunteer at it? Mm-hmm. That's very different than the church being a group of people and how deeply should I be involved in people's lives. Mm-hmm. So if you're asking how much should I be involved in people's lives, I'm like, you should be involved. That should be the focal point of your life. But the Bible delineates that involvement by priority. Mm-hmm. So as a father and a husband, my number one involvement in my life should be with my wife. Mm. My wife takes priority even over my children. And so I should be very involved with her. My second priority then should be my children. My third priority, if your parents are living, should be your parents. Your fourth priority, if your grandparents are living, this is all from Scripture. If your grandparents are living, it should be your grandparents. And then probably your siblings, right? So I'm 5-6 steps in, and then I'm involved with the church family. I'm involved with the lost. I'm involved with all the relationships that God brings around me. So my life should focus around relationships, but in a descending priority.
Yeah, and to clarify, or maybe you're about to do this, so I apologize, but that's priority, not the counting of hours invested.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Because I won't have seen Heidi all day today until I get home tonight.
Right.
Right.
Maybe I was your priority. This is like our third meeting today.
Yeah, but if she called me, I would walk out of the podcast right now and prioritize her.
Excellent. Yes.
If my buddy called me to goof off, I would silence the phone and move on. Kind of thing. So I think that's where it starts. And so when I first read this question, I thought about it in that context, and I think about it in terms of relationships. Now, when that turns into like social gathering, like the church is a social organization. It's fine. We do things, and those things take volunteerism. Then I would say, well, I would go back again, and I would say, how are my ranking of relational priorities tied into that? So, if my kids are in game day, I think it's a great idea for you to coach their team. If you just like coaching and you're coaching 5 game day teams and your kids are at home alone on an iPad, I think you're making a terrible decision. If you and your wife need Christian friends and fellowship, you should be a part of a life group, right? If you are a part of 3 life groups because you and your wife don't like to be in the same room together, I think you're making a terrible decision. I think there's times like I think there's ways that we pitch in. Like, for instance, I think if you have young kids, you should take a turn in the nursery.
Sure, yep.
Serve a service, go to a service. I think if you're a grandparent, you should volunteer in children's ministry because it's a great way to give a tired mom and dad some rest. I think there's times that the church does an event. We do the Fall Fest, and I think it's great if you say, that weekend, our whole family is going to be totally absorbed with the church. It's fun. It's outreach, right? I'm great. We just came off of our Christmas services not long ago. I'm unbelievably grateful for the volunteers who spent their whole Christmas Eve and left the building at midnight on Christmas Eve when I did. But they don't do that every day. They don't do that every week. They may do that regularly. And they should not do that to the detriment of their family. The Hampton family is who I'm thinking of. They were all here serving together. Kids are older. They could, if their kids were little, they probably couldn't have made those decisions. So it's all about that stuff. When you hear me talk negatively about it, you're hearing me talk about involvement in lieu of or as a poor substitute pursuit of Christ. So the church I grew up in, going to church was considered following Christ.
Sure.
And I'm like, no, going to church is an accelerant, a help, a part of. But we would go to church so much that we didn't have time to know our neighbors. We didn't even have time to serve in our community, because we were always in a meeting that had singing and preaching in it. And we weren't actually engaged in relationships with other people. Now, that to me is the clarifier on it. Now, this is the counsel that I would give. I think involvement in church is deeply seasonal. and it's also deeply about priorities. So, if you have an opportunity to be involved in serving at the church or being connected with people, and you say no to that so that you can stay home and play Call of Duty all night, I think you've made a terrible decision. And you're giving your life to something valueless when serving through the church could be valuable. If you served at the church and you had to quit volunteering because you're taking care of your aging parents, I think you made the right decision. Because taking care of your aging parents is an act of worship. If you don't come to a weekend service because you want to spend the summer at the lake on the boat having a beer with your friends, and you disengage from the church for 3 or 4 months, I think you're making a terrible decision. If you miss a weekend service because you took your family on vacation, I think you made a great decision. If you can't volunteer at the church because you're in 4 bowling leagues, I think you're making a terrible decision. If you step away from volunteering for a season so you can go into a bowling league to share Christ with your friends, I think you're making a great decision. So to me, it's all that. I think it's seasonal. I think you should always serve in the arenas your children are in. And you should flex that up through so that I didn't say you have to be with your kid every aspect, but the family's on the same schedule. You know what's going on in your kid's life. I think you should know your kid's friends. Like so you lead the student life group and you volunteer. You take a part of your vacation and go to Momentum Youth Conference. You want to experience that with your kids. It's awesome. When your nest is empty, I think you should serve more. Because you're going to fill that time with nonsense. When your grandkids come along, one of the greatest things my mom and dad ever did for me was they served the church by watching the kids a lot so that Heidi and I could serve. So it's all motive, it's all priority, it's all what else would you be doing? And what I would say is the category to think that in is not volunteerism, it's in relationships. And how am I facilitating those relationships? And I think there's a lot of seasonality to that. And I think that's all okay and that's all good. When you start to fill your life up with everything and the church of Jesus becomes something that's on the fringe of your life, I think you're way out of balance.
Sure. One of the things that one of the trees you're barking up is if church is a compartmentalized part of your life, you're already probably thinking about this incorrectly. Like the church is not just a 501c3 that happens to be somewhere near where you live. Like the church is the grouping of people that God has called out to do the work and the mission of Jesus himself. And so that's why doing the bowling league to reach your friends is a great decision, because you're living out the mission of Jesus as a part of his people. If you're doing it rogue and trying to do it on your own, well, now like think of the heart behind that. Well, I don't have to be attached to the social organization. Sure. If you're doing it to avoid the called out people of Christ, that's a different thing. Like there's a whole different mindset to it. The way that you talked about honoring your family, right? Following Jesus, you honor your family. I want to do whatever I want to do with my own schedule. That's not a tenet of following Jesus. So regardless of how you compartmentalize it, a lot of it's that heartbeat, that attitude, or the relationship like you talked about.
Yeah.
So when we think about some of those things, is there any type of like gut check or mindset that we can be thinking through? Like, you know, as we enter a new season, maybe if you have children, your kids' sports season wraps up, like what are some ways that you can think through some of these things? Because to our listeners' point, sometimes the activity, and even to some of your examples, it's the exact same thing. So what are some of those mindsets that we can try to like, okay, if I ask myself this, I can start to realize or govern, I think I'm in the right or wrong mindset?
Well, first of all, I would say that I actually see very, very few people who serve too much at the church. I thought of that when you said sports. I watch parents kill themselves and their kids to be in sports, obey the coach as if he is your spiritual authority, all for something that kids will not take through life with them. And they'll do that to the detriment of the church. So the kids will never miss a practice. They'll never sit in Sunday school. And I'm like, I would rebuke that. I'm like, that is absolutely unhealthy. It's ungodly. And you're talking to a guy whose kids played varsity sports. So I am not anti at all. My kids, 5 of my 6 children played varsity sports. So I'm like fine with all of that. But selling your soul to it and being gone for seasons, I feel the same way. I feel very strongly about the retirement community who disappears for months on end. I'm like, guys, you cannot maintain relationships that way. Well, we have another set of relationships in Florida. I'm like, then you bailed on them for 6 months. I mean, this is you're talking to a guy that literally just got back from Florida. I'm okay with vacations. I'm okay with getting out of the gray skies. Like I'm not legalistic about it, but I'm like, be really, really careful what you're doing there. So what I would say is, I think the balance is, do I know people at the church, and am I known? And if I do not have a set of relationships in which I am bearing one another's burdens, praying with one another, serving one another, giving together with things, if I do not have those set of relationships within my local church, I should be involved enough in the local church that I have those set of relationships. I should know people, and I should be known. One of my, I'll just be honest here, because just two of us, nobody will ever hear this outside
No
of
one's
here.
hearing this. Yeah, even Jason's not listening right
Yeah,
now.
one of the most frustrating things to me as a pastor is when people will say to me, I went to Grace Church and I left and nobody even ever called me. And I'm like, that's because nobody ever noticed that you went to Grace Church. And I'm like, you're this idea that you are a part of something and you're not, you don't know anyone and no one knows you. I'm like, that is symptomatic of the priorities of your life, because if you quit the soccer team, they would know because you're there all the time.
Well, if you're listening, you wouldn't catch it. I started grinning as soon as you came up
And
with this.
shifting in his seat very uncomfortably.
I'm like chomping at the bit a little bit here. We relationships are much more spatially oriented than we ever want to give credit to it.
Yeah.
And so the reason that you were friends with the kids that you grew up with in elementary school is because you sat next to them, studied next to them, played recess with them, like you hung out with them. It was not because you said, you know what, that kid, no matter what, I'm going to be friends with forever. That's why you drift away from those relationships. That's why when your best friend moves schools, suddenly you're like, we're going to be best friends forever. And a year later, you're like, his name was Matt, I'm pretty sure. You know, like you forget about it. So when you think about the casual, I know who you are by name type of relationships at church, this is where some people have that emotion. Well, Jeff, I did know you. We did talk in the lobby at least once a month, blah, 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 blah. It's like, right. Your relationship was dependent upon you running into me at this place at that time on a given weekend. So when you didn't show up the next weekend, it's not a mean thing. It's how we work as human beings. I didn't think of you. I was thinking of the other people I was running into and talking to and having that relationship with. If I leave a gym, if I stop going to a grocery store, there's a guy I used to connect with all the time at Aldi. Like every time I went there, we would talk, we would joke, we would talk about the Cavs, like all this kind of stuff. And then I don't know what happened to him. He got another job. He transferred to a different store.
Yeah, and
he's not mad at like.
And what something happens in church, and I'm trying not to be cynical or even defensive, but something happens in church where we will say to each other, we should have deep relationships, we should truly love each other. That will be expected by many people, but not reciprocated. And so and then when it's not reciprocated, distance happens, and then we'll say, "See, the church is not what it is." And I'm like, I'm sure I'm overly sensitive to this because it happens to me all the time. People will be like, "You didn't care about me," and I'm like, I haven't gone anywhere. I didn't walk out of your life unannounced and not say anything, and like I don't know what to do. And somehow we'll then use that relational kind of fact pattern to say, well, then the church is false or it's not genuine and all those kind of things. And what I'm saying, and I'm trying to say this lovingly, I'm not trying to be defensive, I'm not trying to be snarky. What I'm trying to say lovingly is, if you don't know anybody and no one knows you, then you are not tied in relationally to the depth that you should be.
Yeah.
You don't have to know 100 people.
No.
But you can even say, well, because people will say, I went there for years. I'm like, no, you sat in a room for years. You've gone to all these for years.
Right.
That has nothing to do with knowing people. And I'm like, because sometimes we'll be like, well, I've gone to this church for 20 years. I'm like, yeah, but you don't know anybody anymore. You're not talking to people. You're not meeting people. You're not serving together. So you feel disconnected. Well, it's not because the relational mechanism of the church changed. You have disengaged from it, or the way that you engaged in it changed. I was just talking yesterday to a guy, and I said, it's funny, even when I come to Grace Church, the Bath campus, when I come here on a weekend and I'm not preaching, I feel funny. My way of engaging everyone changes when you're preaching, and I'm just here on the weekend, but you're preaching. I'm like, I don't always know what to say or what to do.
Sure.
And I'm like, yeah, that's the relational stuff we have to fight through sometimes. So I would say that is the marker for me. If I'm not involved in people's lives, and no one is involved in mine, and if I miss church for 2 weeks in a row, would anybody notice? Would like Miss Christie call and say, "Hey, the kids miss you," or would Pastor Nate say, "Hey, you were leading this here," like. You don't have to be here 24 hours a day for that to be the case.
Yeah.
But it's an easy marker of involvement. And even if it's like, hey, we put you on the schedule and you haven't shown up, you've declined it for 3 times. Are you okay? Yep. That's not people using you. That's just being aware. We don't take attendance.
Right.
We don't use facial recognition. So I'm like, yeah, it's involvement, how we know those things. And I would just say that. I would say like if you're not that way with other people, if you're not like, where is Joe? Like have you seen him? Like that's the marker I think of as a baseline healthy involvement. And then it grows from there. And I do want to say, because I really want to avoid guilt, it is seasonal. When you are unmarried or young and no kids, you can be hyper involved. And then being a parent will isolate you for a minute. Don't feel guilty about that. Just don't live in it forever. When you've got the hardest part of parenting, you're about ready to come up on it with Ainsley, is when your kids are old enough to have a social life, but but young enough they can't drive. It is the most time-consuming part of parenting. You don't show up to as much because you're trying to have your kids do that. So your involvement in church is sitting in the parking lot at midnight waiting for the bus to come back from the youth event.
Right.
Right? I'm not talking about feeling guilty about those things. What I'm saying is, when you're through that and your kids are off on their own, don't turn that into the lake. Enjoy the lake. I'm not anti-lake, but don't disappear. And don't turn that into involvement or finding yourself or a different set of hobbies. You have to make the time and the energy to be connected to the people of God.
That is the heartbeat of all of the quote-unquote involvement that a healthy church is trying to promote. If we're like, hey, we have some new groups starting, it's not because we want numbers up in the programs that we offer. We're trying to offer avenues for you to get to know some people that suddenly you can know them and they can know you.
Yeah.
So that when something, it's one of my favorite things that happens here at the church, it's almost ironic, is when you find out that someone went through something really, really difficult and they were completely handled and cared for by people of the church before we even knew it happened.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's amazing because they were known. It's not because they were special. Matter of fact, sometimes they don't even necessarily have the greatest outgoing personality or whatever. It's no, they were just known. They were in people's lives and they were all able to respond to each other. And that's why we're get into a group, join a team of people so that you rub shoulders with them, get to know one another, do something on purpose, because then not only are you known, but you will truly feel more connected to what God is doing through the church.
And you'll own that work. Probably my favorite, and I'm fresh off of this, so it's fresh on the brain. Probably my favorite thing is at Christmas time. We do 10 services. Yep. It's a grind.
It is.
It's fun. Don't hear me wrong. I love it, but it's by the end you're like, I'm a little brain dead. everybody there is volunteering. And it is like you climbed Mount Everest together. And it's people aren't getting paid. They're not getting perks. Usually there's dinner. That's the perk, is we like have soup or something for people. But I'm like, you are bonded and befriended, and like, it's fun. And you wind up, even if you don't know each other at the beginning, you wind up being friends. It's almost like going on a missions trip. That's the fun of serving.
I just had that conversation this Christmas with a couple, John and Jenna, and like we were talking about how like one of our favorite Christmas traditions is we always end up serving together at Christmas.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just like, right, you bond together, you do these things together. And I mean, I see these two at church regularly, but the only time we sit down and talk or we start, it happens to be at Christmas time. And it's fantastic.
And it's a blast. It would be unhealthy if the same 10 people did that every weekend.
Right.
It would be wonderfully fun for you to do that on a rhythm that will connect you to people. It's fun to teach a Sunday school class and have those kids know you.
Oh yeah.
And to look forward to seeing them. It doesn't mean you have to teach one all 6 services.
Right. Of course not. Yeah.
You know, but to be the Saturday night 6:45 third grade teacher, it's fun to know those things, and you will have fun with it. And then when you can't, then your church family steps in and like helps or releases you, or it's time for someone else to do it because your mom is sick or whatever. And I'm like, to me, that's the healthy part. Anything that is, I sit on the weekends or I sit and I watch my kids, I don't participate. I'm like, that's unhealthy. So who do you know and who knows you? And then looking for the joy of serving. Here's the thing at Grace Church. This is my personality. We're blunt. So, for instance, when we're raising money, I just look at, if you listen to this, you're part of Grace, I will look at the church and say, we need money. Just blunt. If I need you to pitch in and take a hit for the team, I'll just say that. Hey, we're moving into the new building. We need a bunch of people to show up, move chairs.
Right.
In fact, we just did that after Christmas.
Right.
We're moving all the chairs back. Can you guys just show up and move chairs? And we'll have fun with it. There's no secret hint. There's no unspoken expectation. Like if we just need grunt work done, we'll just say, hey, nobody likes doing this. Can we all show up and do it?
Yep.
It winds up being fun. The serving and investing in your life is not code for volunteerism for me.
Right.
For me, it's me being your pastor saying, no, I'm telling you that this is where the church comes alive, where you will come alive, and it winds up being fun. And you're not signing up for life. When your life changes, let's find a different way to do this. So you don't have to fear that. When I grew up, that's the way it worked. When my mom signed up to do Vacation Bible School, she signed up for life. Yeah. And then she started to dread it a little bit. When my dad signed up to be a deacon, he's like, I'm never getting out of being a deacon, kind of thing. That's not the healthy stuff. If there was a new Bible study, you were expected to go to it, whether you went to 3 others that week or not. That's the unhealthy stuff.
Sure.
The friendship part of it, and the serve the Lord, and then if it's just grunt work, like, hey guys, we need to do this. Can we all just show up and do it real quick? At Grace, at least, we'll say that stuff out loud.
Yeah. Well, you always say that love alters behavior.
Yeah.
And when you have relationship with people, you'll do things because you love them. Like, I will help anybody I love move chairs without asking a question because I love them.
And you don't want them stuck moving up.
Right. So when it's random, like if Walmart called up and said, hey, we just helped out a bunch of things and we need people to help move all of our merchandise, I'm like, good luck.
That's right.
I don't hate them. I have no relationship with them. I don't love them, and therefore they don't alter my behavior. But when I'm connected with people and I have those relationships and I realize what we're doing together and it happens to be for Jesus, and can you help move the chairs? I'm like, Sure, I can move some things around and come move chairs.
Yeah, it's why it's not the custodian's job to sweep everything. It's like, no, everybody needs to go home Christmas Eve.
Right.
So let's just all pitch in real quick, and we did. And maybe an hour and a half after services, we're like, Merry Christmas, see you guys.
Yep.
When we get back together in 2 days to move chairs.
Exactly. Well, thanks to our listener for submitting this question, and I certainly hope that's helpful. There is a lot of life in being involved in what God is doing in and through His church, but it takes the mindset and the relationship and the love to see what He's doing. If you have questions that you'd like to have us engage, you can always submit those at bath.gracechurches.org/mixedmessages. And if we can help you take any unique next steps, maybe it's to find a place to get connected and begin to build those relationships, reach out, let us know. We would love to help you do that. If you like what you're hearing and want to hear more of it, make sure you subscribe, follow, rate, and review our podcast. And if you're looking for a place to get connected, begin to have those relationships and see what God's doing through the church, check us out here at Grace, or even begin to discover us online. Thanks so much for jumping in with us today as we continue to seek God's voice through all the mixed messages around us. We'll see you next time.